When thousands of men showed up at training camps in South Carolina, local businessmen saw opportunity, and so did at least one woman. In Greenville, Mrs. Eugenia Duke went into business making sandwiches for the soldiers at Camp Sevier. She wound up launching a brand of mayonnaise that is an icon of Southern cooking and eating. Dukes Mayonnaise doesn't use sugar. It's a recipe that gives it an edge in the market today. But did Eugenia Duke alter that recipe because of wartime necessity?
She had what she called a family recipe. I'm not so sure that that family recipe was exactly the one that she used, but it must have been awfully close because it consisted of eggs, oil, and cider vinegar, no sugar. Now, by October of 1917, this was a good thing because sugar was getting much more scarce. Within 2 months, it would be rationed, and she couldn't have used it.
Eugenia Duke made the sandwiches in her Greenville apartment, as many as 10,000 in one day.
Obviously, I didn't know her, but I suspect that Eugenia Duke saw an advantage and took it. I think that she was an entrepreneur all the way, but I suspect that Eugenia Duke was more accepted as an entrepreneur because of this whole layering, if you will, of women doing new things in new ways. Many of the men, after the war was over, after the armistice, wrote to her, asked for recipes for the mayonnaise, for the sandwiches, and she was happy to oblige. But then she figured she could do it herself. So she got herself an office in a new building that had just been erected about 3 years earlier in the West End on Main Street, and in a former paint shop of the Greenville Coach Factory down at the river, she set up a mayonnaise making operation, and it flourished.
Mrs. Duke sold her sandwich company to her accountant, and she sold her mayonnaise recipe to the C.F. Sauer Company, which still produces that recipe in Greenville today.
We can make 240 jars of mayonnaise a minute. This plant here in Greenville probably does about 2.3 million cases a month. So we're selling and making a lot of mayonnaise today, much larger than I'm sure Eugenia ever imagined back in 1917. I would think Eugenia Duke would be just delighted to know people are still enjoying her recipe, unchanged for 90 years, delivered and in homes today, and it's just a Southern tradition. I'm sure she had no idea the magnitude of her initial sandwich business.
In 1917, South Carolinians were swept up in the whirl of training camps, bond drives, and volunteer work, and the promise that war brought to the home front.